Good morning and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline Hamden. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Brad Macdowall helps make Hamden tick. As an active member of the Legislative Council, he's here in the WNHH studio to help us make sense of some of the crazy stuff that's been happening there and around town. Welcome to WNHH, Brad Macdowall.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to meet you. I'm going to ask you to get so close to that mic, you're almost touching it. It's fine to adjust it. And it's good to meet you in person. I edit stories and read about you pretty much every day now because so much is going on in Hamden.
Yeah, it's a lot.
You guys have been pulling these all-nighters. It's like you're in college or something, finals week, but it's all year.
Yeah.
Last night you went to 11. You went to 1 in the morning the other night?
Twice. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to go to 1 in the morning? I thought you were supposed to stop at midnight.
So the usual deadline is 11 o'clock because that's when the custodial staff goes into overtime. But, you know, in the case of our budget, we had a deadline the following evening at midnight. So there wasn't really much of a choice there.
So we're going to go one by one on some of the big issues that are occupying you guys these days. But overall, I mean, from the budget to pensions to transferring stuff day to day to keep the government running to redoing the whole schools, which you voted on last night.
Yep.
You got it on your plate. Did you know you were signing up for that when you joined the Legislative Council?
I knew it was tough. You know, I knew I wasn't signing up for something easy. I wasn't aware of the specific challenges that it was going to come with.
Do you guys get paid?
We get a $2,000 a year stipend.
So you don't get paid?
No.
That like pays for the mailer or you send a newsletter?
You end up spending more doing it. I mean,
although you could do a labor department complaint because it's probably about 37 cents an hour.
It is definitely, but because it's a stipend and not a salary, you know, it is a volunteer position, and they give us the stipend to help, you know, account for some of our costs. But
I've always wondered, you know, we love to throw wet rags at people who make laws, but you guys put in a lot of time and give up a lot of your life just to go over the budget, to scrutinize every decision that's made in government, how to get the fire department equipped, how to have enough cops on the beat. Why do you do that? I mean, what's the reward?
For me, everything I have is because of the community that I grew up in.
Which is Hamden.
Yeah, I grew up in Hamden, born and raised. And, you know, not only did I grow up in Hamden, my family grew up in Hamden. My grandfather grew up in Hamden, was a deputy fire chief. Everything I and my family have is because of the community that we grew up in and the you know, the opportunities that community offered, you know. So for me, during college, I got very involved in campaigns, almost accidentally. And
where college was that?
Quinnipiac University.
Oh, so you even stayed in Hamden for college?
Yep.
So you don't go far from home?
I haven't. I love to travel when I get the opportunity. But
did you live in the dorms or did you live at home for college?
I commuted. I lived at home.
Did your parents stay up till 1 in the morning when you're out drinking?
They did not, and honestly, I worked 2 to 3 jobs when I was in college, so I didn't really get to go out too much when I was in school. You know, it was tough going through school full time and having a lot of bills to pay and stuff. So, you know, I didn't have too much time. I was able to go to like a lot of hockey games. I loved the hockey games, but partying didn't really happen much until after graduation.
Okay.
But yeah, no, everything I have is because of the community that I grew up in, whether it was Hamden High School or Quinnipiac University. And, you know, I started to see while I was in college some of those opportunities slipping, threats to the arts programs, you know, other things that were sort of falling short. And so, you know, when I was working in all these other communities in Connecticut and New York on campaigns.
New York too? Yeah,
I did a lot of work in New York. And
were you studying political science? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it felt sort of negligent not to bring that home. You know, I had a district, or I lived in a district that I felt was not adequately represented. I felt
what part of town was that?
Westwoods. And Is that
where you grew up too?
Yes.
So not a big commute to Quinnipiac?
No, 5 minutes. It was great, fantastic. I had a shorter drive to campus than most students had to walk from their dorms. But yeah, so no, I felt like it was the responsible thing to do to bring it home, and felt like I had an opportunity and the ability to make some things better.
We're talking to Brad Macdowall about how to make things better in Hamden, where he grew up and where he serves as a member of the Legislative Council. You're listening to him on Dateline Hamden, WNHH FM, 103.5, live stream, NewHaven.org. So let's start last night. You were up till 11 last night, so it was an early one.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the 3 R's program, which basically fair to call it a once in a generation rethinking of the whole school district.
Yes.
Closing some schools, refiguring where some of them work.
Yeah.
And last night specifically, was it you had a deadline to vote on bonding, where the state's putting up some money and the city and the town's putting up some money to rebuild some schools.
So yesterday specifically was to send sort of the application into the state, because the state's giving us a considerable amount of money to be able to do this. They're covering about 70% of the costs. So last
So that's
night,
3 schools, right?
no, there's
2.
well, it's a rebuild of Westwoods, like complete rebuild.
Did you go there as a kid?
I did. I went there for a year. I actually ended up going to Bear Path for a little bit. And then I went to a magnet school in New Haven, Betsy Ross.
Oh, that was a good school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was amazing.
Were you there when Peggy Moore was running it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That was before her. She had a different career trajectory when she went over to Cross.
Right. Yeah, I was there when she was principal. Yeah, so there's a ton of renovations that are involved with other schools, like adding a wing to the middle school so that 6th grade can move to the middle school. Changes to Wintergreen Interdistrict Magnet School, which is now part of the town and no longer an interdistrict magnet school, and being able to outfit that so it's ADA compliant and can we can have some special education there.
Are you talking about the building, not Winter? It's not going to be Wintergreen anymore.
It's not going to be, well, we'll call it Wintergreen, but it's not.
Oh, yeah?
It's not Wintergreen.
What's the magnet school going to call itself? Because they're going to North Haven, right?
I honestly I don't know. I know that they are in they are in North Haven. I'm not sure what they'll be calling it. So far, we've been referring it to as Wintergreen.
That's not going to confuse people to call it Wintergreen.
I don't know. And
confused the hell out of me just there.
Yeah, no, I we've been calling it Wintergreen. I think the building's always been called Wintergreen. I don't know.
Is this overall sense of this plan controversial? I know there are controversial aspects.
Yeah.
But did people generally agree with let's fix up these schools, let's take the 70% of state money and match it?
I think everybody agrees that we need to do something. We are not racially balanced. Even when you look at the state metrics, there's a couple schools that are on watch for racial imbalance, but not.
But you had to close one school that was the most racially balanced school in the Western Hemisphere, which was 25% pretty much Latino, 25% Black, 20% Asian, 20% white, and because of the crazy way they compute racial balance, it was considered out of balance, had to close because they only do it as white and non-white.
It's very problematic. It is very problematic the way the state looks at racial balance, because
I would call it ridiculous.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny because everybody thinks that it's ridiculous, but nobody, the state doesn't seem really willing to change that.
So if people agree with the outlines of 3R's program, what was keeping it 11? What was contentious?
I think people feel as though we're going for luxury a little bit instead of what we need to do to educate our students.
You were there when Betsy Ross was redone or not yet?
I was there after the redo. I was on Kimberly Avenue.
Those are nice schools in New Haven because now we've been through this.
Right.
We rebuilt all our schools, $1.6 billion.
Right.
We got between 70 and 95% reimbursement from the state.
Right.
And a generation later, people have been critical, saying we went to luxury, and that even though the state paid for most of it, there were 2 aspects of it that came to haunt us. One is that we still owed a lot of money.
Yep.
And that debt service grew, and they questioned whether they were going too much for palaces. But other people say, why not have beautiful buildings for kids to go to school?
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at the chart of our current debt restructuring, our current debt structure, like how our debt is structured over the next 30 years, including a debt restructure that we did last year, which I wasn't a fan of, but our budget hinged on, so we were kind of locked into voting for it. And then they took this little piece and they put it on top to show us what the 3R program would add to it, and it's intimidating. It is very intimidating. It puts us dangerously close to our debt ceiling for a few years, which, interestingly enough, the more you borrow, the higher the bottom line of your budget is, right? The more it costs to run your town. And because debt is, by state statute, your debt ceiling is 10% of your entire budget, the more you borrow, the higher your debt ceiling actually goes.
And then it could also affect your credit rating, so it costs more money to borrow.
Right. So there's a lot of problems there with getting so close to your debt ceiling. You're close to your debt ceiling. You're raising how much it costs to run your town, so your debt ceiling actually increases, which allows you to borrow more, which is dangerous if you have people who aren't so careful about what they borrow for. It is very intimidating to see how close to that 10% line.
So what are you going to do? You approved it last night.
I approved the application. I had conversations with the Board of Ed administration. I had conversations with some of my fellow council members, and a lot of council members agreed. You know, we're fine for you sending this application. We want this to be done, and we need to fix some of our schools. Winter Green needs to be ADA compliant. We're definitely in favor of the sixth grade moving to the middle school. We definitely need to, you know, first and foremost, fix racial imbalance. However, what that actually looks like, and whether or not we want 3 interdistrict magnet schools operated by Hamden Public Schools, is another question. So the actual structure of what that's going to look like.
Does it get a life of its own in government? If you get an application in, the state says yes, tens of millions of dollars will come. Is it realistic to think you're going to be able to say a year later, we'll skip one of those schools?
Yeah, it's a fluid plan. So what they're changing, or what they're approving, is the overall cost of renovating or rebuilding, in the case of Westwoods, the schools. So there are certain changes that can be made. Certainly, once the application goes through, there are certain things that we're locked into. But things like an interdistrict magnet school plan can be tweaked.
The state will still want it to be a magnet, right?
To
So you're
some
gonna
degree,
have to
yeah.
get a lot of people from out of the town, and
But specifics around that, like, you know, having a global citizenship at one school in the north end of town, and then, you know, having STEAM in another school in the north end of town, and then the one school in the south end of town, we're going to say that it's just career readiness. And that, when we're talking about racial imbalance, one of my colleagues on the council last night pointed out that that's really problematic. You know, so certain specific things like that, they need to be changed. They need to be, we need to be taking it a little more seriously than that. And the fact that people didn't kind of already see that that was going to be problematic is a bigger problem when they're the group of people that are responsible for racially, you know, diversifying our schools.
all right. And we're talking Hamden decision maker Brad Macdowall from the Legislative Council. You know, one thing I noticed looking at it outside from Hamden is the vast majority of your students are non-white in the schools, and the vast majority of your Board of Ed members are white. And it seems like you have a growing African American population, now Latino population. Most of the decision makers are white. I guess, does it take a community time to catch up with the changing demographics?
I think it has taken time to catch up. And, you know, I think that there are people who are dedicated in making sure that we do catch up. Most of the Board of Ed seats are not up for re-election until 2 years from now. There are a couple seats up for re-election this year. But making sure that our Board of Ed and our other, you know, bodies around town are more representative of the residents that we're trying to represent is critical. That's a critical direction we need to go in.
Brad Macdowall, you also, last week you had a pretty crazy night about the budget. So the mayor proposed a budget. You had weeks to, as the legislative body, change it. You had made changes to it based on issues like you thought the revenue projections were unrealistic. You might not get 100,000 from Yale or millions from Quinnipiac, for instance. You thought that they had positions you didn't want in there, like new community policing, cops. In the end, you did not pass the budget. It was 1 in the morning. It was the last day you could do it. People were confused about a procedural vote, that after you pass the budget, you say, now we're going to adopt an ordinance. So then one of your people got confused and thought she was voting against the budget rather than against the ordinance. And then for a bunch of hours, you thought the mayor's proposal would go into effect. But then you had a legal ruling hours later saying, no, you guys voted for it. You didn't need to be voting on that ordinance. But still, the mayor said he's going to veto it.
Right.
So you passed it only 7-6. You need a 2/3 vote to, we'll do some higher order math maybe to figure out how many votes that is, but it's more than 7 to override. What's going to happen?
So we need 10 votes to override a veto, granted that all 15 members are present.
And is it of those present, or is it of 2/3 of the whole
I believe
council?
it's of those present, 2/3 present. There are a couple individuals who said that they believe our budget is better and more honest than the mayor's budget. And so they will vote to override the veto, even though they didn't vote for the budget.
Who was that?
I don't want to put anybody else on the spot, but there was a Republican member who was quoted in the New Haven Register as saying if she knew it was going to fail, she probably would have voted for it. And there is another Democratic member who said they're still considering voting for the budget, or sorry, voting for the override.
That gets you to 9.
Yeah, so there are individuals thinking about voting for the veto override. I think
so. You're not giving up.
No. And look, I'm not happy with the council budget either. I mean, I fought to get that budget down. And nobody was willing to make any cuts. Everybody likes to complain about the mill rate and about how high the budget was, but they weren't willing to make any motions to cut or support any motions to cut, and so that's a problem in and of itself. But nonetheless, the council budget is more honest and doesn't leave us $13 million in the red like the mayor's budget does at the end of this year. So the more responsible thing to do for the town, and the thing that's going to end up having taxpayers spend less in the long run is the council budget.
Which does raise their taxes a little more. Everyone was avoiding that 50 mil rate, that magic number. You got it to 49.99. He had 48.76. But you're still including some revenues you don't believe are true. Like, do you really believe Yale's ponying up $100,000 and Quinnipiac millions?
No.
So how could you vote? Is it because in politics you have to go for the imperfect?
The feeling of council members who voted to maintain those, and we did lower our expectations for those revenues. But the individuals who voted to maintain some revenue in those lines were because they wanted to make a clear message to both universities that they are part of our community and they should be pitching in. And they're not right now. So while I understand the feeling of council members who wanted to maintain that sort of pressure on the universities to be a part of our community, I don't like that we are looking at revenues that are not going to come in.
So they're saying $100,000 from Yale, which currently gives nothing, right?
Correct.
And how much from Quinnipiac?
Quinnipiac fluctuates. In the height of our feud, after the party incident, we got nothing, and they started busing people to the North Haven plazas instead of the Hamden plazas.
When was that?
That had to be 2015. 2015, President Leahy showed up to one of the student May weekend parties.
I remember that. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
That was a big deal, and that sort of escalated the feud between the town and the university. And I was actually a student at the university at the time, and I was interning for the mayor's office.
Wow.
So it was interesting.
What was that like?
It was interesting to be on both sides of it. There's certainly things that both sides have done that are not They're not productive. They're not. There were certainly personality issues more than they were actual, problems.
Was it Leahy and members of the government who just got too personal?
Yes, it was absolutely 100% personal.
Wow.
Yeah, there's no reason. I mean, certainly, when you have college students living amongst community members, you're going to have issues like partying. And the university did not do what they needed to hold students responsible for their actions, because partying is one thing, trashing your neighbor's lawn is another thing. And there were no actual, consequences ever on campus for that sort of behavior for years. So, and then at the same time, the town consistently did whatever it could to prevent the university from expanding. And so it became very, very personal. And
who was personal on the other side?
On the town side?
Yeah.
I think there were some council members. I wasn't on the council at the time, but I believe the council president at the time was quite personal. I think that mayors in the past have made it very, very personal. There have been some personality conflicts.
Is it still personal?
I think less so. There's a new president at the university. There is a new president of the council. I don't think that it is personal still, but certainly those lingering feelings remain between the two institutions.
So how much did they give last year?
I actually don't know how much they give last year. I want to say it was somewhere around $1 million, but I'm not.
And what are you counting on this year in the new budget? What's your budget say?
The budget, I think, says 1.2.
And Jeremy Mack says, "Good job, Brian Macdowall." Thanks for listening, Jeremy Mack. And what did the mayor say?
The mayor asked for, I think, a little over $2 million. Again, it's.
And your position was put more in than they're giving now to put the pressure on, but don't put more than you think you're going to get. That's a very fine line.
It is a fine line, because if you don't
want to shoot yourself in the foot to not get anything, but you don't want to be unrealistic and have to make it up.
You put $1.2 million in revenue.
There's no way you're getting more.
You put $1.2 million of revenue in your budget, and you receive $1.1 million. You're still $100,000 short on your budget.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the year, how do you close that gap? Do you sweep capital, and then at that point you're paying interest on operating expenses? Do you send out a tax anticipatory notice and ask residents to fork over more money? Do you sweep other lines and cut other expenses, which is something that we were not able to do this year because the mayor waited until the 11th hour to tell us that we weren't paying our bills and that we had past due notices for utilities? I mean, there's no good options there. So even $100,000 down the line can become really problematic.
And so that's where it stands now. So you were class of 2015 at QU?
16.
2016. Oh, so you this is your first term as a council member?
It is.
So you're pretty young, aren't you, Brad?
Yeah, I'm 26. I just turned 26.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, happy birthday. And
thank you.
So do you see yourself spending a lot of your life being on legislative council, long meetings, things like that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm here to fix problems. I'm not going anywhere until those problems are fixed. This is, like I said, this is the town that I grew up in. It's the town that my father and my grandfather grew up in, and they've been public servants all their life. And
what did they? So the grandfather was deputy fire chief.
Yep. And then my father was a Hamden High School teacher until about a year ago.
Oh,
and,
really?
Yep. And my mother is currently she's the receptionist at Helen Street School.
Oh, okay. So you're really tied in. Do you think you have a special perspective on the Quinnipiac dispute, having been a student?
Yeah, I think I certainly see both sides of it. I think,
like, are they having repercussions now if you trash your neighbor's lawn?
I think that there have been more efforts to find the landlords, and then the landlords can kind of come down on the tenants. I think that's been more of the effort. I haven't seen a situation so far where a student was punished on campus or held responsible on campus for.
Can they?
They could certainly.
Is there a legal issue?
A legal issue in terms of,
if there's something happens off campus and you're a student, can you be punished by the school for something you did? Like, let's say you're a student and you go do graffiti on the wall of campus. The building's not on campus. Can the campus discipline you for that?
They could certainly sit you down and have a serious discussion with you about your role in the community.
So you're seeing progress, but you'd like to see more.
Yeah, I mean, those conversations aren't being had. The university is not even willing to sit down and have conversations with students about why it's important to contribute to better relations moving forward. And I all the time when I'm knocking on doors, I'm talking to residents about, things are getting better. Things are gonna continue to get better. Give it some time. I know there are hard feelings right now, but let's try to have a refreshed, renewed relationship with a new president and move forward in a positive way, because the university is and can continue to be an asset for the town.
Now, what about expansion? Now, are people worried about stuff coming off the tax rolls?
Certainly, yeah, that is a concern. And
how do you feel about that?
The university needs to be pitching it.
Are you against expansion, or you just want to see greater contribution?
No, I'd like to see responsible expansion. I don't want to see trees knocked down, but they certainly have a lot of property along Whitney Avenue that is being currently held as green space. To have green space on our main thruway, our main corridor, the road that everyone from Southington and Cheshire uses to get to 91, is ridiculous. It is handicapping the town. We need that space developed, and that's something that I've personally reached out to the president and some of her staff.
You want them to sell the property to you guys?
I would love for them to figure out a way to develop the property. I mean, if they handed it over to the town, absolutely, we can have it developed in less than 2 years.
Or if they want to do a university corridor like Yale has done.
I would love to see. So my ideal situation for North Hamden is yes, a sort of a downtown area, and we're not talking about developing off of the main thruway. We're Westwoods Road, Shepherd Avenue, leave those alone. But the main thruway that everyone uses to get to 91, right? Yeah. Whitney Avenue between.
And are you okay with either way? They sell to town, you find a developer, or they develop it the way Yale has with its real estate?
If they develop it, they need to involve the town in that process. That needs to be done in a very responsible way, in a way that's gonna be beneficial to our residents, beneficial to the students, beneficial to the tax, the grand list. And I'm afraid that a lot of the stuff they've done has not been responsible development. So we need to make sure that is developed responsibly, and it can be done. But I envision 5 years down the road, and I'm trying to work to make sure that this is involved. This is included in our plan of conservation and development that the Planning and Zoning Commission is working on right now. Is sort of a downtown area, restaurants, bars, shops, apartment buildings above the shops.
Mhm.
Because I think that does a lot of things. Number one, it grows our grand list. Number two, it gives people a place to stop in Hamden. We're not giving any of these people a reason to stop in Hamden. And the last thing it does is I think it eases the student housing crisis. Students are going to want to live in the area where the action is, walking distance from campus. So I think that does a lot of things, and we need to see it committed there.
All right. I know that's come up in the COPD discussions.
Yeah, it has.
All right. Well, Brad Macdowall, what a pleasure to get to know you a little bit and talk to you.
Yeah, it was great to be on.
Thanks so much for coming on WNHH. We're going to take a little break, folks, and then we're going to pivot from Dateline New Haven to Dateline Hamden, where we're going to talk about English as a second language and language acquisition with an expert who's in town making the rounds. Thanks for listening to Dateline Hamden. We're going to take a little break with the Afro-Semitic Experience, one of the great New Haven Hamden collaborations, doing a Wish I Knew How It Feel to Be Free from the CD A Plea for Peace. Hold tight. We'll check you back in 5.